Hello, good morning and welcome to the second of our Inside Out talks for this academic year. Oh, checking you can hear me, yes. The mission of our prestigious Inside Out lecture series is to bring the best minds of our generation to inspire and support the work students and staff do across the school, Leeds School of Arts here at Leeds Beckett University. My name is Marion Harrison, Senior Lecturer in Fine Art, and with my colleague, Dr. Anya Connor-Crabb, Senior Lecturer in Fashion, we are delighted to be hosting today's talk, Navigating Fashion in a Time of Biodiversity, Loss and Climate Change with Jennifer Whitty. Jennifer will talk for approximately 40 to 45 minutes, followed by Q&As. Anya will be chairing the Q&As with Jennifer, so if you have any questions, please use the Slido hashtag LBU-JW, and if you go to www.slido.com. So it gives me great delight to hand over to Anya now to introduce Jennifer, who joins us this morning from New Zealand. So Anya and Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you, Marion. So we're very excited to welcome Jennifer here today, and thank you so much, Jennifer, for taking the time to talk to us about your work. So Jennifer is an Associate Professor of Design. Her work as a designer, researcher and educator aims to usher in a new era of deep systemic change for global fashion, one that is radical, intersectional, expansive, holistic, plural, post-colonial and relational, rooted in social and environmental justice and flourishing for all living things. She specialises in reimagining mindsets, models and systems through the integration of thinking and doing.
Hi, thank you so much, Anya. Thank you. I'll just share my slide. All good there? You can see that. Perfect. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and thanks to Marion and Anya and the Leeds Beckett team for inviting me. It's an absolute privilege to be able. And I'm really humbled that I've been given this platform to tell my story. I'm grateful that you are all giving your precious time to listen. So thank you. It's staggering to think that the field of fashion is one of the biggest employers on this planet, as 1 in 6 people works in a fashion-related job. And I'm acutely aware that the vast majority of people who make up this industry, predominantly women of colour, are not often afforded the same privilege to tell their stories, as theirs do not get the attention and recognition that they deserve. So I want to acknowledge my privilege as a white Irish woman with genealogy to Muintir na hÉireann, the native people of Ireland, and that my reality is not a singular thing or the only reality that matters, because we cannot generalize that all 8 billion of us on this planet live the same, or that we share the same level of materialism, and that we all live wastefully. I'm mindful of generalizations that perpetuate a colonial mindset that assumes a singular cultural worldview. For even in capitalist nations like the UK or the US, there are huge inequalities in living standards, and it's problematic to think that we all share the same reality. So because of the intersectionality of these issues, I think it's important to recognise that sustainability is often not binary or reductive. There's often no simple black or white, right or wrong. It's, in my experience, lots of shades of grey, lots of compromises and complex decisions in context. So I know my story is not important at all in the grand scheme of things, and I'm well aware of my insignificance, but I'm content with chipping away, doing what I call small interventions of hope that might change things for the better. I also hope that sharing my learnings might give others some hope, or some courage or ability to navigate their own path, perhaps one that is not so clear to them now and maybe hasn't been forged before. And hopefully this can be a path that you can bring your whole self, that allows you to flourish according to your values. And I also want to be uber clear from the outset that I do not in any way see myself as a perfect person who's figured it all out and leads a perfect, sustainable life. We are all imperfect beings in an imperfect world, living in a system where sustainable change and capacity to do so. So I don't think it's helpful for me to say what is and isn't important for you. And I think it's important to recognize that our own values grow and shift and learn and change as we grow. You know, I think back to in the noughties or the early 2000s when Primark, their shift to design-led clothing was really exciting to me in terms of how I saw that it democratized fashion, how people who had previously maybe been left out of fashion could participate. And as an Irish company, one that we all grew up with, the jobs they brought to the economy were noticeable, and the sheer joy that their clothes brought to people at every income level was palpable. But as their business model has become the default and the norm, albeit on steroids, I might add, and not the exception, we've learned more about the impacts of high volume petrochemical clothing and labour rights. And my opinion has shifted, but it's far from a straightforward black and white answer. So this talk comes from a place of love and respect for all our lives, from a place of trying to make it better for us all together. I'm not trying to save the planet. I'm under no illusion that the planet will do just fine without us. It is us that the planet might need to save. And learning to reconnect with ourselves as part of the planet and nature is a vital part of being a citizen and a designer in the 21st century. So I won't be focusing on the glamour and glitz side of fashion. Instead, I'm going to be pulling back the curtain to go behind the smoke and mirrors of this industry to reimagine a new one. And this talk might be a bit more philosophical than practical. It won't give you a to-do list of instructions, but this is a means to an end. I hope at best to sow some seeds in your mind that might grow as you figure out your own motivations and values. And sometimes questions are more useful than answers, especially if they invite further inquiry and investigation. So I invite you to extend your depth of field, to dream, to go beyond the dominant mode of pragmatic impatience and greed in fashion, to awaken our capacity to dream of alternative futures. For it is the only way our together. So where do I begin to bring you on my journey with fashion? Who am I? And while I'm proud to say I'm a sustainable systems designer, educator, and researcher, this is kind of just the tip of the iceberg. Because I'm not a lone entity. I'm a product of complex intergenerational systems. And I think it helps for us all to remind ourselves that we're all part of larger complex systems that connect us to much larger forces of nature, long before our individual existence in this particular form on this planet. And thinking about myself as part of a larger ecology or network has profoundly shifted my mindset and my worldview, my beliefs, my values, and my expectations as a human. I think it's been an especially important counterpoint to the dominant worldview and belief system of fashion that elevates the ego and the individual star designer. So mindsets and worldviews, there are changing conceptual framework of reality. And there's something that I'll return to throughout this talk as they lie at the root of who we are as humans and designers, how we go about our work and our lives. And they inform how we interact with each other, what we place importance on, and where we think our agency lies. So fundamental change is often at the result of a shift in mindset or worldview that leads to different ways of interacting with others. It is well understood that our past shapes our present and that our experience shape our worldviews, values, and mindsets. I've had the privilege of living in Aotearoa, New Zealand, for a third of my life. And for those of you who aren't familiar with New Zealand, it's an island nation right down there in the Southern Hemisphere in the Pacific Ocean in Oceania. For millennia, Māori have been the tangata whenua, or the indigenous people of Aotearoa. And perhaps quite different to other countries, Māori culture is an integral part of contemporary life in New Zealand. And in such a situation as this, like this one, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, it would be customary for Maori and non-Maori to introduce oneself with what's called a pepe. Forms of hello, sorry, I'll go back to my slide. Sorry, I thought so that it sets the tones for interactions and a deep connection of humans to nature through whakapapa or genealogy. And it starts with the non-human world, our oldest ancestors, our rivers and mountains, as it traces down through one's family lineage until we get to ourselves, humans. I'm going to share with you my pepeha, one I created with the Pepeha Project, a not-for-profit initiative led by Māori as a gift of connection for all New Zealanders. The act of doing a pepeha, putting myself in the macro, bigger context of connection through thought and speech, is powerful and restorative. It gives a framework to decenter humans' exceptionalism, something that is really needed at this time of human-induced climate change. And I think it is a humbling act, one that taps into something that resonates deeply within me, and I think perhaps us all. So, kia ora tātou, greetings all. Ko Bínider, Hill of Hoth, te maunga. The Hill of Hoth is my mountain. Ko Muir Éireann te awa. The Irish Sea is my water. Growing up meters from the ocean, I have a deep affinity with the sea. I am of the sea and the sea is of me. I feel a shared identity with it. I am from North County Dublin, Fingal in the Republic of Ireland. Whitty is my family name and Jennifer is my name. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you, your ancestors and your descendants. So on my father's side, we whakapapa to Norman Vikings who settled in Wexford to farm the land over 1,000 years ago. And my mother's sides are creatives who hailed from the northern province of Ulster, Derry and Donegal, regarded as one of the wildest and historically the most Gaelic part of Ireland. I'm eternally grateful that my parents were adventurous, intrepid travellers, and at the age of 11, we moved to New Zealand for several years and then on to Papua New Guinea, a place very few people get to experience. So growing up between these different worlds transformed my consciousness during these formative years. And it's helped me to navigate a life with somewhat kind of multicultural soul in a world that often seems to be in love with black and white narratives. And for the global audience, Ireland is a tiny nation of approximately 5 million people, celebrating just 101 years of age as an independent nation. Powerful nations on the planet, the UK on one side and the Irish influence. People, we have our feet in both West and a poor colonial past. We occupy a space between the native English-speaking Anglo-Saxon world and the North non-Anglophone world beyond it. Coming from a place outside the dominant centre of power has been helpful as it's prepared me for what Peter Senge says, to see wholes, to see patterns or dynamic relations, what we call systems, understanding different perspectives and different complex dichotomies within our lives. I'm proud to have discovered that my ancestors were animists who honoured and revered the force of nature and believed that non-human entities and inanimate objects possessed a spiritual life force. And as the first colonial project of the British Empire, much of this thinking and these practices were oppressed in Ireland with the advent of colonisation and adoption of Christianity. But with each passing year, this ancient wisdom embedded in my DNA feels more and more relevant to this time, as it's clear to me that we need to question our anthropocentric worldview and the hierarchy it perpetuates. For in my opinion, much of the shift for sustainability needs to come from deep within our culture and our worldview, as the majority of social and environmental issues that lie within the fashion system are endemic to our culture and the paradigms it supports, because everything is interconnected. I've sought out opportunities to learn from my own culture and other Indigenous knowledge systems and worldviews, and it's given me a huge sense of hope to think about how much knowledge our ancestors had that we have deep within us. We need to learn to work with nature in symbiotic relationships, like the cool fires practice of Indigenous fire management, to find intersections where all our perspectives can meet. And I say this to you to compel you to look within your cultures and traditions, as so much of our world has become homogenized into a singular dominant paradigm, an Anglo-European model of reality at the expense of the richness of all other cultures. So, okay, maybe now you're thinking, what on earth has this got to do with being a fashion designer? But I'd like to gently remind you of an inescapable truth, that every item of clothing originates from the forests, soil, water, rocks, and gas of our biosphere, and will ultimately return to that biosphere either as toxins or nutrients. It's been an incredible act of deception and separation that a discipline like fashion that relies so much on nature has become so divorced from it that we think it even bizarre to consider fashion and nature in the same context. So let's tackle the elephant in the room, the bewitching and magical force that is fashion. I am in awe of the medium of fashion and its power on many levels, the material and immaterial, the public and private, the individual and collective. We all have in common the embodied experience of wearing clothes. And these clothes are our chosen second skin and our interface with the world. Fashion in the public domain is show up for each other. We inspire each other and we align with each other as we perform our identities. And I think its full potential and magic is something we've yet to fully understand or tap into. One of the reasons I've been attracted to fashion is I truly believe that it helps us to be part of nature, to be creative, as it can help us to move, to vibrate, to express ourselves, to be alive. As I worked in the fashion industry across the globe, from bespoke or pret-a-porter to mass market levels, it started to become difficult to reconcile my love for fashion with the cracks that were starting to show, as I witnessed firsthand how casually waste had become endemic to the system. So throughout my time in evolving into one of the world's largest, most complex and dynamic industries, but in my opinion, this industry was starting to lose its way, sacrificing the values that made it so magical. Chasing the needle to overproduce at all costs was becoming the norm. The streets of Dublin transformed rapidly from centres of making to centres of shopping. Places like Donegal, where I worked, sites of craft production for over a century or centuries, lost their industries as making went offshore. And local people I knew personally lost their livelihoods and their culture of craft. And this troubled my conscience greatly. I'm aware of many of the issues that cause for human, non-humans, and planet. The fashion system has excelled at shrouding its activities under a veil of smoke and mirrors. Strangely, everywhere in the glossy ether, but simultaneously nowhere, as production and the messy bits happen out of sight and out of mind for the Western audience. Clothing stories of origin are concealed or simplified on care labels, and a numbing sameness pervades as clothing aesthetics and styles are centralized, homogenized, and standardized. Never in capitalist societies have we owned so much clothing, wanted so much clothing, and wasted so much clothing. It shocks and saddens me to think that most resources taken from the ground today will be waste within 3 to 6 months. Yet it is not simply the garment that fails. It is, as Jonathan Chapman says, our connection to the garment that fails, as the majority of our clothing waste is symptomatic of a relationship breakdown between us and the garment. A regular reminder for me of how far fashion has strayed from its magic to the fetishization of the new is the common encounter I have with people when I compliment what they're wearing. So I say something like, "Wow, I love what you're wearing, I love your top." And they usually respond with, oh, this whole thing, as they kind of deflect the compliment and they seem to discredit its value. Unless a garment is new, it doesn't seem to matter. Or the other old chestnut. "Oh yeah, I got it for a £5, said with such pride." But every time I hear this, a little bit of me cries inside. It saddens me to think that the garment seems to have no inherent value other than what is given to it as a commodity of the market. And as wearers, we're fixed on one gear, that of hunter-gatherer, and the dopamine release of getting a bargain. In this system, we're not given time, capability, or permission to talk about our relationship with our clothing. Garments are much more complex than they appear to be. They're like icebergs. Their complexity and scale is much greater than what we see on the surface. And this is indicative of our reductionist worldview and its impacts, as we've lost the ability to see the whole. We've become so fixated on the garment in itself that we've lost touch with the wider system that it came from and will return to. We, too, are much more complex than we appear on the surface. We carry so much with us, our beliefs, our culture, our values, that all of which inform our why, and they aren't observable necessarily on the surface. The more we shift from looking at the parts to understanding the whole, our consciousness will expand and the remit for fashion will change, will enlarge. So confronting this was and is overwhelming. It burst the bubble of a dream, as I move through what I have since learned is called the emotional cycle of change. So from stage 1 of uninformed optimism, gung-ho, ready to take on the world, to stage 2, where you start to get informed and a pessimism creeps in, to what is called the Valley of Despair. So this model was developed in 1979 by the psychologists Don Kelly and Daryl Connor, and I'm sharing it with you as I kind of wish I had this at the time, so I could anticipate change and know that I wasn't the only one going through this. This was quite natural, going through a process of new information and change. So my feelings ran the gamut. If I stay, am I complicit in this destruction? What, if any, agency do I have as a young designer trained to primarily in a craft of aesthetics? It's all too easy to fall into apathy as the social environmental crises are so complex. What difference can we make, and what is the point of even trying? And if I'm to be frank, I felt wholly unprepared by my design training based on the ideals of the 20th century. It taught us very well how to make beautiful garments, how to understand and interpret the zeitgeist, but it did not give us skills to think outside of form, to critique the industry, to challenge its logic. Sustainability was not a word used, and when it was said in relation to fashion, it was in hushed tones. My 20th century education did not prepare me to deal with the broader range of challenges and the wider range of goals of the 21st century. And I think this is where we draw from our deep reservoirs of experience, values, and worldview. And as someone who is kind of used to being outside the dominant system or culture, I knew there could be a different way. To stay with the trouble, as Donna Haraway says, to dig into fashion as both a critic and an advocate. And this is what's brought me to academia, to become a critic and conscience of society, striking the balance between creativity and critical thinking through practice-based sustainable fashion and education before it even was a thing. So working from the inside, albeit left of centre, has given me a place to speak my truth to power, to tackle troubling nature of our complex, wicked problems from the root, our mindsets, models, and methods. I am a practice-based researcher, which means I actively create new knowledge in the form of my practice that feeds into my teaching to educate the next generation for the 21st century, to disrupt the status quo and foster social and environmental good. I make garments, services, experiences, events, and systems, all with the purpose of trying to shift industry and individual behavioural change, expanding the remit of fashion designers to examine every part of the value chain opportunity to design. Staying with the trouble involves cultivating responsibilities, and this trouble is specific and situated. Everything is connected to something, which in turn is connected to something else. We need to understand how particular human communities, as well as those of other living beings, are entangled. So the key systems theorist Donella Meadows created a guide called Places to Intervene in a System, from the least effective to the most effective leverage point for impact. So starting with number 12, constants, parameters, and numbers, such as taxes and standards, right through to the number 3, the goals of the system, number 2, the mindset or the paradigm, to the most effective way to create change in a system, the power to transcend paradigms. And the work of Matilda Tam and Kate Fletcher never fails to give me hope and clarity of perspective. This diagram represents a way of looking at fashion practices nested in each other, and it's been really helpful to explain and situate fashion in its context, from product or garment, from the first stage of product, garment, and materials and process that are quite tangible and local, to start to zoom outwards to get a broader perspective on the system. And this is where we see how fashion intersects with the knowledge of other diverse disciplines, such as law, business, ethics, until we get to the most effective point to intervene in the fashion system at the level of paradigm. And this is where we look at the meaning, the purpose, the culture, and the worldview of fashion. So while we might not go into some of this material with the depth of a specialist lawyer or psychologist, this broader perspective on how this knowledge speaks to fashion will lead to larger vistas that help us to collaborate and work across disciplines to see the whole picture, something that is essential to our survival. So how to begin? I do not work in a linear way. I work in research, described really well, design. Insights give fresh perspective that influence each other. A new mindset informs a new way of designing, and so on. And I've often centered my work in the tangible product garment, but I move up and down this axis of materiality and tangibility and hopefully impact. And I share this with you as I think I've heard sometimes that my work is really strategic, but I think it has a lot to being open and receptive and also being instinctive. Listen to your gut, soak up what's around you. I think it's one of the most important and perhaps underutilized skills that fashion designers have in their toolbox. The cognitive practice of zooming in and out of the general to the particular is a necessary condition for designers who are looking to enable systems level change. So my research and educational goals take the form of what I call interventions. They pose new models, new mindsets, and new roles for a fashion system for social and environmental justice. I look at how design could contribute to new behaviours, attitudes, and beliefs, alongside evolving new systemic models and roles for designers for the 21st century. Often it's conducted through the lens and methodology of transition design, a proposition for a new era of design practice, study and research that advocates for a design-led societal transition towards more sustainable futures, while building on the work of Earth Logic Fashion Action Research Plan by Ms. Tilda Tam and Kate Fletcher. I'm going to share some of my previous projects and some recent ones to exemplify my approach and my methods within the space. So a shift to mindset towards new behaviours and attitudes and beliefs is perhaps the first hurdle in working towards a new system. Contemporary society has simplified and reduced the complex systems of our natural world and our place in it. But unlocking Indigenous knowledge can provide us with a rich knowledge base to rebuild a holistic and interconnected relationship with the natural world. I had the incredible good fortune of being part of a restructure of the entire College of Creative New Zealand to one that was based upon Mātauranga Māori Hofari framework, which is a Māori knowledge framework. And this worldview reinforced a oneness with nature that is exemplary and powerful, in stark contrast to the Western mindset of dominating the natural world, which still pervades sustainable thinking. I've a lot to learn, but this knowledge has shifted my mindset and approach to research and teaching. And in fashion, we tend to look to the future for answers, but this approach is sometimes culturally exclusive and short-sighted. I think it's time to open our hearts and minds to learn from outside the Western canon of knowledge, to activate deeper interconnectedness and understanding of our responsibility to people and planet. I've been going to China for about a month every year over the past 7 years, apart from the COVID period, and where I've been very of the fellowship. I work in an interdisciplinary team to and reimagine fashion practice in China for systemic change. And this has led to ongoing cross-cultural collaborative work with Yan Yuan, Assistant Dean at Xi'an Polytechnic University, where we've developed lots of different projects together. This one, cultivating a mind-body relationship as part of nature, draws from Indigenous knowledge and philosophy from ancient China and Europe, predominantly Taoism and Celtic wisdom, our own cultures. We foster an awareness of our oneness through the principles of Taoism, in particular Huanhui, everything between the sky and the earth. And this ongoing work asks us to transcend Western binary classifications, to consider a non-hierarchical, interbeing relationship with all forms of life, including our clothing. As part of this work, we've delivered guided meditation workshops at conferences in Antwerp, and these images are from our Enclosed Research Collective's inaugural event, Unresolved, in the Metaverse, and it was built with Mozilla Hubs. We've joined forces with the Enclosed Collective led by Fiona Diefenbacher that aims to explore how clothing acts as a mediator between various bodies, states and environments, As up to 17 collaborators from across the globe, we transcend the traditional disciplinary boundaries of fashion, body, dress, as we've been exploring the lived experience of embodiment at the intersections of design practice, spirituality, philosophy, and sociology. And our dome at Unresolved allowed for an immersive experience that propels us to move from the old notion of separate nature, which arose in European modernity, constructed on a premise of divisions between body and mind and object and subject. And in this space, our clothed body were physical mediators and the interface for our relationship with nature and the world, as we attempted to envision a more equitable coexistence between all things on Earth. And this thinking's been extended into a series of recent projects that I've been conducting over the last few months that propose the quietly radical act that rejects the neoliberal capitalist rhythms of productivity and consumptions by simply spending time being in solidarity, care, and in common with our enclothed bodies. Everyday rituals of dressing and wear are rich sites and underexplored ones for solidarity between mind, body, soul. And this work holds space for the everyday, relational, sustained, emotionally engaged, and complex act of wearing and being with our clothing in our everyday life. It drew from Indigenous knowledge systems of Moana ideology, Maturanga Maori, to foster new materialism based on solidarity. To shift our metaphysical cognition, it asks if we can shift our understanding of fashion from one based on consumption of commodities to one that helps us understand our feelings. Can it serve new purposes of solidarity and becoming together? And these projects, while are small in scale and time frame, have revealed something beyond the logic of the market and something of an almost spiritual immediacy ingrained within our everyday life. And from this theory of knowledge, there's no genealogical distance between us, our clothes, our body, and nature. We are in common. So a particular area of interest for me is also the development of new models for fashion that reconsider our relationship with the dominant economic and political structures of our time, and try to find ways that fashion can exist beyond the one-size-fits-all consumerist mindset. Can we open up new entry points and pathways? So I draw from this idea of designing along continuum, as posited by Terry Irwin, where designers have the ability to contribute along a spectrum that ranges from existing paradigms to radically new ones. And this also corresponds with another model I refer to in my work by Richard Buchanan, where there's 4 orders of design. The first being signs and symbols, communication, graphic design. The second being traditionally where fashion would sit as objects or things. The third being interactions and experiences. And the fourth being systems and thoughts. And I want to ask if we consider fashion from these more complex higher orders, from the perspective of interactions, experience, and systems, will it help fashion to become more attuned, more empathetic? Can we discover a more integrated understanding of what fashion could be? And this reinforces the need for a systems approach. As fun, design is a synthetical way of thinking. It brings together knowledge from a variety of areas and specialisms to create a new kind of whole. It's a process, a way of approaching things. And achieving this interdisciplinarity requires openness to other ways of knowing, to imagination and creativity. Patience and tenacity are very much needed attributes to work in this space. It sometimes takes years to build relationships, waiting for the right time and the right conditions for something to come to fruition. So this activist project called Space Between, founded by myself and Holly McQuillan in 2015, was many, many years in the making. And it took several years of developing relationships with local manufacturers, semi-state corporations, and not-for-profits to find a solution for the landfilling of clothing and textiles. It had many aligned goals and objectives. On one hand, to deal with the end of the pipe waste stream from the current industry, but also to fill a gap between tertiary education and industry, bringing academic research and other interested parties, whether that be students or other like-minded people, into an applied space together. And this new model created capability for remanufacturing or upcycling garments in New Zealand. And it was something that we didn't know existed at that point at the scale we were trying to do. And it consolidated both our social and environmental purpose. All our clothes were less than 0% waste. We used corporate uniform waste that was destined to landfill due to a risk of security. Everything was made in a 25-kilometer radius. And this clothing range, which we called the fundamentals, was also accompanied by a wholly transparent system where everything you could find out how long it took to make something, where it was made, all the manufacturing pricing breakdown. And it was to unlock the latent qualities of these pretty undervalued resources. And it was a comprehensive design strategy with remanufacturing processes. And we developed 3 upcycling techniques called the conjoined, spliced, and pieced, which could be applied to any given garments. And all of this information was available on our website through videos, as we thought it was really important to share all of this information and create more open source knowledge. And our clothes were made by a fabulous for-profit employed people with barriers to conventional employment. Our long-term goal was to ultimately design out waste at the source and create value and equity for all resources, both material and human. The techniques involved a level of craftsmanship and time that is outside maybe the logic of the industrial system, but is of value in a circular system that honors waste as a resource and instills resourcefulness in its makers. The techniques serve to highlight the provenance of the history of this garment so you could see its previous life, and our range was radically transparent. So Space Between serves as a bridging mechanism for students in pre and post graduation to create a fluid community of independent designers, all working together to address a myriad of issues and social, environmental, while helping them to develop their own models and capability. For me, working with and for people is of paramount importance in my work. As perhaps one of the most vulnerable communities of humanity at this time is the refugee. The world's displacement crisis is one of the defining and pertinent issues of our time, and it reveals the power structures and fragility of our global condition. I collaborated with the artist Vanessa Crowe and the Colombian refugee community on this social innovation project for TISA, which is Transitional Economic Zone Aotearoa. It is an experimental art festival that explores a new, more fluid kind of temporary residency practice. So both Vanessa and I had backgrounds in fashion and textiles and the experience of working with different communities, but we wanted to extend our creative practice to enlarge the social and environmental issues of our time through the medium of clothing and textiles. And we had a shared vision to revitalize and upcycle the material detritus of our fashion industry using large quantities of said post-consumer corporate waste. And we also want to explore how clothing could be repurposed through the sharing of skills, stories, and experience to drive an alternative model that turns our ideas about shopping for clothes on their head. This project was probably far from perfect in outcome, but it is one that has stayed with us all. It's deepened our capacity for contentious interventions in the context of displacement and the climate crisis, as it's given shape to new practices in movement building and social design and equity. By creating spaces and conditions for care that allow people to activate their power, it strengthened our understanding and ability to replicate the enabling conditions for others to experiment with new approaches to social justice. Within my teaching and research, I've developed curriculum projects that activate a strategic systemic use for design beyond just the design of clothing to confront the status quo and suggest new possibilities. And part of this role for new designers involves an acceptance and an understanding of fashion systems reality as a really dynamic, chaotic, interconnected array of real experiences, relationships, feedback loops, both before, during, and after the garment is created. And within these new roles, sustainability is no longer considered other. Instead, holistic considerations of human, economic, and planetary well-being are grounded in the foundation of these roles. This project was prompted by my involvement with Local Wisdom, conducted by Kate Fletcher. And it gave me the permission to extend an exercise I'd been doing for years with my mother and her wardrobe. This project deliberately shifted its attention away from the dominant power structures of the industry, from the catwalk to the potent and powerful but very overlooked site of the wardrobe. I would argue the place of real fashion knowledge, and opening up new narratives of more equitable, emancipatory, and holistic fashion systems can start in this powerful place. So the wardrobe hack was a service of individualized set of actions, inactions, tasks, and exercises to give power into the hands of people. It consisted of 6 stages, all based around people sharing their clothing use practices. Going to people's homes, learning from them, listening to them, helping them was powerful. And their lived everyday social practice and experience of fashion is something that's unfortunately not always at the forefront of a designer's mind. But spending time understanding fashion's person-object relationship was transformative, and it's something I continue to bring to my teaching and research. This pilot project to promote self-reliance, autonomy, repair, and reuse by individual users within the domestic sphere contributes to the domestic circular economy. And in order to encourage this user-centered process, there was not only need for upskilling and engaging wearers with making, but also in shifting perceptions of what is both possible and desirable in order to overcome barriers to participation. So this work has been published a lot, and it's also been taken on by several different institutions in China and Portugal, which gives me great, very satisfying. So fashion really needs a period of radical change to remain relevant in the 21st century, to move away from a linear economy towards an inclusive, circular, regenerative economy based on feedback-rich flows. Part of that change means asking hard questions. What is the purpose of fashion? Designers of all disciplines have often focused on making things, the garments, the product, the brand. And while those things are important, they often neglect the changing relationships between people and things. Relationships are the essence of the living world. If we want to design better products, services, and systems for people, we need to shift these relationships from simply transactional and paternalistic ones to ones based on care, love, learning, and respect. My hopes for the future of fashion are fashion for wholeness, sensory, social, cultural, biological, ecological, and spiritual. Interdisciplinary fashion, embracing other ways of knowing in the humanities, the arts, psychology, anthropology, science, indigenous knowledge, philosophy, and fashion as a correspondence between the inner and the outer self. For in my opinion, this crisis is caused by our worldview, our ways of understanding reality, our world and ourselves, our values, priorities, motivations and aspirations, and centrally our individualism. It is an existential crisis of meaning. It is about who and what we have become. Efficiencies or greener technologies will not save us until we take a hard look at ourselves. The future of fashion is ripe for new models of practice that challenge the dominant logic and relationships between designer, producer, and wearer. My shift from the better known story of the glamour and glitz to something else was not obvious at the time, but it's one that feels a lot more meaningful to me now. And my advice would be for you to find your cause. Start somewhere, and that place will lead you to other like-minded people. Join forces. You cannot do it all alone. Do not be an expert. Always be in learner mode. I hope my small interventions of hope inspire you on some level to consider following your own path through fashion in these complex times. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. That was very, very enriching. I think that was absolutely wonderful. There's so much I could relate to that you spoke about. You also provided very much a zoomed out view looking at systems, but then honing in on very specific examples so we could understand many of these ideas. So thank you very, very much.
No problem.
We're now going to move on to some of the questions from the audience, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Delighted.
Fantastic. So we've had a few coming through on Slido, so I'll just go through those to begin with. So the first one that came through, the person asked, do you think the industry can revolutionize its labeling? Maybe that the label suggests a wear time, 3 years perhaps, or that the label tells a wider story?
I think that's an absolutely fantastic idea. Absolutely. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah.
It's cutting out, or yeah, cool. I think whoever suggested that, I think that's absolutely amazing. And that I think what's really beautiful about that, I was examining a label yesterday for an interview with a journalist for local TV here, and we were looking at Zara's label, and it was so overwhelming how much text was on it, but really how little information there was there, and how much it was so kind of undecipherable to us. Like, a lot of it didn't really mean anything. There wasn't anything as tangible or relatable as what that person has just suggested. So yeah, I think that would be a fantastic place to start. And yeah, like thinking of all the different ways that we could communicate different types of relationships through things that are relatable, are tangible. Absolutely. Great idea.
Yes, I think it was from the same person. They kind of mentioned, you know, could it say, rather than just saying it's eco or green, could the labels educate? And I think there's definitely potential in that. I agree, Jennifer.
Definitely. There's certainly, yeah, there absolutely is. And at a time of so much kind of greenwashing, what does being green mean? Like, sometimes just putting it in something in terms that are more immediate and more in our kind of wheelhouse of knowledge. I think that's a really good place to start. Great.
Great. So another question that came through, someone was asking, do you think when we reach our 40s or 50s, we have enough clothes in our wardrobe to last us until we are 80?
I didn't catch all of that. Sorry, Anya, if you think if we're in our 40s or 50s that we
have enough clothes in our wardrobe to last us until we are 80.
I might be thinking about that with my we most likely do. Yeah, that's a quite a wake-up call. I think, yeah, we probably, I know I was buying for my future self when I was in my 20s, which was probably a little bit weird, but I knew that some clothes didn't fit my body or my lifestyle then. Yeah, I think, I hope that as we get older and more in touch with who we are, that we sometimes raise the volume on our fashion choices. Like I think of, I go to China regularly, as I was saying, and women tend to retire in their mid-50s. They get really, really bold with what they wear. So I hope that we, when we think of advanced style, and that we start to accelerate maybe how the force of fashion, that we own it on our own terms and we're less slavish to faddish trend. We know who we are and we wear for ourselves. So maybe that will change, but also you could be doing that, adding something to the garments that you have, mixing it up. There's many different ways to engage with fashion outside of the perpetual new.
I like what you mentioned about buying for your future self. That's an interesting idea. It might not be suitable for me now, but I would envisage one day to be able to wear that or feel like I would like that in the future. Great, thank you. Another question that comes through asks, can the industry ask how an item of clothing makes you feel rather than how you look or function? That feeling and association is more important than how you look?
Yeah, that's where I'm hoping to take my research, and if anyone wants to reach out, if anyone else is interested, because I think it could be a mediator. Like, instead of it being a feeling of anxiety, which, talking to a lot of people, their reason for purchasing continuously is trying to keep up, trying to be relevant and fashion, not necessarily from a place that's actually an intrinsic connection with how they are actually feeling, and maybe using it as a way of moderating or modulating feelings. I think that is a really, really rich site of exploration. Imagine, putting on like most of us, if we, like, I'm wearing garments that make me feel happy today, and I'm sure many of you are, but when you have those moments where you're doing something in the public eye, you have an interview, you tend to go to those garments that don't let you down, that won't fail you, and that they're going to be this kind of, I don't quite want to use the word armor, but because that sounds too harsh, but that they'll elevate you and they'll make you just feel complete. And I think that, there's work, I think it's Otto von Busch has been doing as well with like neuroscientists. And I'm really keen to look at that from different perspectives, where how can we learn from science and read different signals, with different data, whether it be through brainwave activity or through other mechanisms within the body, and how can we can complete our whole selves through fashion.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that response. So zooming in on something quite detailed, someone has asked, are there some fabrics that you think garment makers should stop using now? Polyester, for instance.
That is the elephant in the room. With the data on microplastics, on microfibers, it just pains me. It just makes me think we do not have systems to cope with it. It is poisoning our waterways, our food, our animals. I cannot, on polyester, big question mark. No. And how much it also, I would love, as we're talking about that relationship of body to garment, how many chemical, what's leaching into our skin, our largest organ, when we put petrochemicals on our body. So there's so much that is broken down in the friction, the use stage of polyester garments, whether it be washing or even just wearing, even just moving. That friction is enough to release microplastics, the microfiber beads. So we need to, that's something that, the technology has kind of surpassed our ability to deal with it. And until there's really good systems in place, I really have a huge question mark about why we're relying on it. And obviously it is a non-renewable source from the ground as well.
Absolutely. Actually, linking into that, a question for me is relating to your views on the circular economy or circular design as a concept.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. we have to always look closely at who is creating data or reports, and we know big business and industry doesn't necessarily want to disrupt the status quo. Is it infinitely recyclable? But does that also rely on a system of growth? And we're not tackling these problems of the microplastics. It's just it's terrifying.
Mm. Great, thank you. Someone has also wanted to know, which fashion company do you think is currently the most green?
Oh, I can't, like, not being in there in person, I think there's so much nitty-gritty to drill into. I could speak most knowledge to Wellington, and we've had the people that work for them come in, and their commitment to every level of trying to reduce whether it be toxins in the dyes or making with organic cotton and working with reputable suppliers and feeding back, they're wholly transparent. So I think, yes, I still look, a lot of fashion companies are still based on growth. So the business models, to a certain extent, do also need to be looked at, and we also need to look at the end of life of all of our companies. So I think there's a lot of people out there trying to make changes, but I think we have to question a lot of the practices or the kind of the benchmark for success. I think companies like Koto, what they can bring to industry if they can change standards for cotton and what a fashion company can do, it will be remarkable. But I'm also really, I'm most excited by artisans, by local producers that produce in small scale, or actually just thinking of Stephen Park, another designer who he wants to leave no trace on this planet. He uses recycled secondhand fabric. Thing that we need to look at further.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Someone posted another question, I think maybe relating to something you said earlier, and they were wanting to dig a bit deeper and asking, but aren't feelings and looks related? Someone's feeling of wholeness may be absolutely intertwined with the way they perceive themselves, perhaps to look.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, what was the last bit, Anya? They and the way they might perceive themselves, but
perceive themselves to look.
And sorry, sorry, I'm just not catching quite the question.
Yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. So they asked, aren't feelings and looks related? Someone's feeling of wholeness may be absolutely intertwined with the way they perceive themselves to look.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think it's a kind of mutually reinforcing relationship. So you feel better in something, you in turn, well, maybe perceptually think you look better, or perhaps you do, but I think it's, yeah, that relationship, that back and forth, those feedback loops between body, mind, garment is such a powerful place to explore, and it changes so much over the course of the day as well. Like it's so temporal. It's almost like the seasons or the weather, and I think there's something to really look at that dynamic. It's a really lively, dynamic relationship, and it can be, something that can activate so many things. That I was talking to a person this week. She was asking me about gunge or grunge, and I was reflecting on kind of when the youth movement of my youth, and we were talking about how at that time things were maybe a bit more binary and you had to be locked into a particular style or subculture. But the beauty of this time in this moment is that you can navigate through all these modalities and these, you know, maybe one day you're feeling like a goth and then the next day you're feeling more like a, I don't know, a raver. And there's ways of kind of maybe speaking to the world and helping, you know, as we've become more open and inclusive of neurodiversity, of disabilities, you know, this is also part of maybe we can use fashion to communicate and help us. You know, if most people, if high consumption people get a lift, a dopamine lift when they purchase something, but after they buy it, it plummets, your well-being plummets. So why can we not look at creating modes of engagement with fashion that actually amplify well-being, make us feel better about ourselves than make us feel worse?
Absolutely agreement with that. Very good point. I actually have a question myself. So you mentioned when you were discussing your Enclothed project that you had sort of a metaverse output. I'd be interested to hear your views on sort of digital technologies and their role for sort of sustainability.
Yeah, I think like everything, I don't know, I tend to take everything, I'm curious and I'm open and I'm always want to see different possibilities, but you know, I'm not like, I never ever think anything's going to save us, or certainly not these days. And I take it with a pinch of salt. So I think, you know, that metaverse enabled us in the time of the COVID, the pandemic, to all collaborate from China to America to Australasia, Europe, and you know, and it was such a novelty that we could create a world where people could explore and experience things together. We could collaborate. We had our little avatars, and you know, so all of that really provided quite a unique space to come together without flying across the planet. And you know, I know whatchamacallit, the data servers and you know, there's things that energy or IT and telecommunications don't come without some kind of impact, but I think they do offer a space to connect and explore. And you know, I have colleagues that explore digital fashion, and whether having, you know, buying a blockchain version or a skin of a garment can offer that kind of thrill of the new that is less impactful. I don't have all the data on the comparison of the physical to the digital garment, but yeah, I think it's something I think embrace every mode, but you know, always remain a little bit like it's not necessarily going to solve everything, but it might open pathways to new interventions and new sites of engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always a buzz around new things emerging, like new digital technologies, but having that critical view is absolutely important.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think, yeah.
So I've had another question, which was, what for you is the most interesting period in fashion?
It's just jumped into my mind, but I think because I was quite focused on it when I was a teenager, and I remember veering my history courses towards it. The 1920s, I just found really, really fascinating as this kind of culmination of emancipation of women getting the right to vote, of the rise of kind of sportswear. So for the first time that women's wear was getting more more about mobility and comfort and less cumbersome, and the kind of youth movement that was starting to, and that alignment of you know, cultures outside the Western frame. You know, you had Jazz Age, and you know, all of that coming together to just create this vibe, this, you know, time of you know, it's post or pre, should I say, all wars as well, or no wars. So yeah, it felt like a time of maybe possibility. Reflected that it was all about well, certainly dancing and things that seemed very empowering.
Yeah, I think I've heard the parallel drawn between sort of coming out of the Great Depression and World War One, and exuberance and happiness, and sort of letting loose of the 20s from now, sort of coming out of the Corona period and enjoying that kind of.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. That's true. Yes, I did hear that. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we've had another question from the audience asking, do you think fashion photography has a role to play in this representation of fashion and clothing?
Oh, good. These are great questions, by the way. Thank you, everybody. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, totally. It's such a powerful medium of communication. Yeah, I think it, I can still visualize the tutorials or the Face magazine back in the day, and always, yeah, I'm always just floored by amazing photography. So yeah, I think everything that communicate, everything that we can use to express and explain things, and I think we've become more and more adept at interpreting images. We live in, oh, I wish I had that stat again, but the average person is seeing so many thousands of images every day, even within the first few hours of the day, we're just bombarded. But I think there's space to start to fine tune that visual perception even more, and to understand those senses even more, and to discern things even more. And yeah, I think absolutely.
Okay, great. Sorry. I've got another question for you, Jennifer. Well, we've got you here, if you don't mind. I'm just thinking for my students, so if they're kind of hearing this talk and going, I really want to, get my head around the systems thinking and drawing on Indigenous knowledges, where would you recommend would be a good place for them to start?
I just a little bit cut out there, just to get their head around systems, is it? Get around
systems thinking and Indigenous knowledges, yeah, places to start, maybe what they could start to read and look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I can share any of my resources as well, but I absolutely think Donella Meadows is like the key person to read. There's System Thinking, I think, is it a primer? Is a really good book to start with, and and she writes in a really kind of quite metaphorical as well. She uses some really evocative imagery. It's quite easy to kind of get your head around. Is it Gregory Bateson? I've been starting to kind of read some of his stuff. Then that work by Matilda Tam and Kate Fletcher that I shared, but and also, who else is it? Leah Aguero, the Unthinking or Unschool of Design is quite a good place as well, and she breaks it down for designers, so we could do short courses with her. But I can share some more as well.
Great, thank you so much. That's very helpful. Right, I think I'm just going to check if any more questions have come through. I don't believe there have. So yes, I think we'll take this point to sort of say thank you very, very much, Jennifer. It's been truly enlightening and a pleasure to hear you speak about your experiences and all these kinds of different views on fashion. So thank you very, very much.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for having me. I've been delighted to be here. Thank you, Anya.
Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to just say a huge thank you to you, Jennifer, also for staying up so late, because I know it's quite late in the day for you there in New Zealand. So for giving us your time and joining us.
It's all good. Well, really, thank you, Marion. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. And for your
pleasure, and to leave us all today with us all thinking about our own small interventions of hope as we go on throughout our day, walking around the clothes that we've chosen to wear today and the things that we might be thinking about. Thank you, it's been very thought-provoking. And also to Anya, thank you for introducing Jennifer to our school and the research community here at Leeds Beckett University, and also that Jennifer's talk will be archived alongside Kate Fletcher, who talked last year for us as well. So I think there's a really beautiful continuity, I think, between both those talks together as a pair, I think, for students moving forward. So thank you, Anya, for introducing us to Jennifer too. And just to say thanks as always to our fantastic event support team here at Leeds Beckett, working behind the scenes, Claire, Karen and Dave for producing today's talk, and to all of you this morning for attending. Thank you all very much. Just to point you to that, our next Inside Out talk is on the 15th of March, and that will be in person in the Leeds School of Arts Theatre, in the new Leeds School of Arts building, from 11 till 1 with Gavin Butt, and he'll be talking about revisiting art education's intermedia dream and looking at radical art education in Leeds and regional colleges throughout the UK. So really interesting talk there. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Anya, and everybody have a good day.